The Star Wars community has certainly fallen in love with the current clones, sparking the question, could a new batch of clones ever replace the significance of those we love today? The clones in Star Wars are arguably very valuable to the community. They have also become one of the most fundamental pillars of the entire franchise, especially in the last 2 decades of Star Wars. For it honestly changed the entire landscape of what Star Wars meant, not just because the clones themselves existed, but also because it pulled us through so much more events in Star Wars through the perspective of the clones. And the clones kind of behaved as the more realistic human side than, for example, the Jedi or the Sith throughout these episodes in the Clone Wars. Because the Jedi and the Sith have something we don't have in real life, and that is the power of the Force. They could utilize the Force in many various ways that makes them stand out, and you could argue that some of it could be even considered superhero powers. Whereas the clones, however, again, they are much more grounded to the human side of things. They have no superpower or anything that makes them more powerful or greater beyond their just very normal human physical limitations. The only difference between us and the clones would be that they physically age twice as fast, and also that they have an implanted chip in their mind, which changes a little bit of the way they think and how they operate. But besides from that, I think it is exactly why the clones has left a mark on the Star Wars fandom. We can relate a lot more to the clones than we can with many other Star Wars characters, especially those who are bound to the Force. However, the in-universe problem with the clones are that they age quickly. Again, they age twice as fast as the regular human, which means that unless they die from battle or some other cause, they will naturally die way sooner than many other people, meaning that their existence in the Star Wars galaxy have been decreased quite significantly, not to mention that clones aren't even being produced anymore. So as hard as it might be to accept, there comes a point in Star Wars where the clones will eventually just vanish. They will be no more, which leads us to the question of this video. Would it be possible for a new era in Star Wars where they will attempt to create a new form of clone that will carry the same emotional value as the ones we have today in the Star Wars community? I think this is a very interesting topic to think about, because we will end up in a situation where we have no more of the original clones that we have come to love from the Clone Wars series and from many other mediums in Star Wars. So if we assume that they will try to make a new batch of clones that will kind of fill the shoes for those who we had previously, what would they look like, and where would they be placed in a galaxy, and if they would spawn from another military conflict or something else? Well, I do think they have to be more on the human side than the alien side. And that's simply because that is what, which I explained earlier, is the thing that makes us viewers a lot more connected to the clones than many other characters in Star Wars. Because they have this strong human resemblance, and they struggle with a lot of the things that we ourselves in this real-life world deal with in many cases. As for the era, I'm not entirely sure. Obviously, they can make a new period in Star Wars somewhere around the Old Republic era, where they introduce this new batch of clones. However, I think it's more realistic to add them when the clones from the Clone Wars series have vanished entirely, and then some period, maybe 100 ABY or 1000 ABY or 10,000 ABY, I don't really know, then we can introduce a new era of clones that will recreate that same emotional impact for us in Star Wars. And as for their kind of in-universe placement, I do believe that they should have a military kind of relation to the universe. The military aspects allow them to actually be challenged in many different ways, and allows us to kind of be dragged through a lot of stories. Now, trying to replicate the entire era of the Clone Wars, where we have the Separatists versus the Republic, I think that would be copying too much. So they will have to change things up a little bit and maybe make multiple factions with the different clones and have them go against each other or go against a larger force or something. But whatever it is, I think they should be associated with a military of some form. So if we take all of this and kind of bring it into a conclusion, would something like this be a wise attempt for the Star Wars franchise, or should they completely avoid doing it? Personally, my thought is, I don't think it would be a good idea to introduce something like the clones again in Star Wars. Simply because if they try to replicate it, they'll most likely fail. We have grown such a huge connection to these original clones that seeing something that's meant to kind of replace them wouldn't really be the best choice. Although our current stories for the clones are being more and more limited, I do think there are still quite a few stories that could be told with the current clones, through comics, through novels, through video games, and through shows and movies. And they can touch upon the clones in different depths through these different mediums, because there were so many clones scattered around the galaxy during the Clone Wars, and there's so much stories to be told there. And I don't think that anyone who enjoys the Clone Wars would be against more clone stories. The only people I think who would be against it are those who generally don't like the Clone Wars era or have already decided that they don't really need more of the clones after the Bad Batch, for example. I think that we could possibly have many more years with Star Wars content and material regarding the clones from the Clone Wars era. And once they have completed all of their stories, or once they think that they're fully satisfied with everything that has to do with the clones, then I think it's time to say goodbye to that part of Star Wars and start focusing on other things without trying to recreate it. But do let me know what you think, and with that, never forget, the Force is always with you.